If you'd like to follow along with me this morning, we're primarily going to be looking into Isaiah chapter 11. And I think it has some rich words of encouragement and hope for us as we look there this morning. One of the images that we're going to look at, and I think this is a fitting image to focus on for a few moments, an old weathered tree stump. That it is a rather fitting picture of hopelessness. Because you think that where once there was life, there was growth, tree that's been cut down, and what remains is the stump, and it represents nothing other than death and decay. That is a very fitting image that Isaiah the prophet picked up on and used concerning the nation of Israel at that particular time. Nation of Israel had seen some glory days in the past. Under the kingship of David, under his son Solomon, the nation of Israel had become a very great and a mighty nation in the world. They had enjoyed God's most abundant of all blessings as a people and as a nation. But that was then. This was now when Isaiah the prophet lived. And the glory that they had had was all in the past. The mighty Assyrian Empire, and then following that, the Babylonian Empire, would come and would conquer the nation of Israel, would drag them off into captivity into a foreign land. And again, the glory days would be over. Through God's judgment, Israel would be cut down like a mighty tree, and all that would remain would be a dead stump. Again, a fitting symbol of the end of hope. But verse 1 of Isaiah 11, notice what the prophet says. Then a shoot will grow from the stump of Jesse, and a branch from his roots will bear fruit. Thinking about that dead tree stump, and it looks like it's dead and done away with, and decay is all that there is. But, as Isaiah the prophet says, there will come a shoot that will grow up out of that dead tree stump. Miracle of miracles, life would spring up from death. Where hope had long been gone, suddenly life sprung up out of hopelessness. I was thinking about maybe a little bit of a lesser example in our household. We've had an object lesson on our kitchen windowsill for several weeks. Jill took an avocado seed. I would have thrown it away, but she took the seed and she did this little thing with toothpicks, and she put it in this glass of water, and she kept the glass filled up with the right amount of water, and that thing's been sitting there for weeks and weeks. And I admired her perseverance because I thought this is just kind of a really foolish thing to do. What's the point of keeping an avocado seed growing in water? But you know, her persistence has paid off. And I asked her to send me a picture Friday so I could share it with you today. Now, you got to look kind of closely at that picture. But that's not a dead seed, apparently, because after weeks and weeks of soaking in the water, if you notice carefully, there's a shoot that's growing down below, and there's a shoot that's beginning to spring up from the top. And so this dead seed apparently is not as dead as I thought. And if I understand what it is she's got in store for this thing, she's probably going to put it into a pot of dirt. And it's going to grow, and eventually I'll probably be asked to go out in the backyard and dig a hole and put it in the ground, because I think she believes that we're going to have an avocado tree that eventually is going to bear avocados. So I've had that illustration in front of me for several weeks that kind of fits what Isaiah is talking about in terms of this shoot that springs up from a dead stump. It is an interesting and encouraging picture that we look at here today. So this shoot from the dead stump here in verse 1, it says comes from Jesse. Does anybody know who Jesse is? And if you say Jesse James, you would be wrong. Anybody know who Jesse is that the prophet talks about? David's father. Good answer, the right answer. Jesse, the father of King David. Now, Jesse wasn't much of a noteworthy figure. Of course, his son obviously was. We know about King David. We don't really know a lot about his father. But what we do know is that he was a farmer. He was a sheep breeder in Bethlehem. Now, that hardly qualifies him as a royal figure. But again, what sets him apart is the fact that his son David became one of Israel's greatest kings. So this shoot that Isaiah is talking about in verse 1 really is a picture of God's Messiah coming from the ancestry of Jesse. Now, we often think of Jesus, the Son of God, the Messiah, being the son of David, a descendant of David, and indeed he is. But for some reason, Isaiah focuses not on David, but on David's father, Jesse. And that's pretty significant because it really means two things of interest for us to note today. That first of all, the Messiah, the Son of God, would not be born into privilege. And we know that. The Christmas story, we understand he's born in a manger. Certainly, he was not born into privilege. And so, in essence, Jesus was no more famous at the start in his birth than any one of us. Someone has written and said that just as David himself was not raised in a royal palace, but rather an insignificant shepherd boy, so the new David will be seemingly insignificant, of humble origins, an unexpected king, someone without the prestige and privilege that rulers so often abuse. So that's got to be one of the reasons why Isaiah the prophet says that the Messiah would be a descendant of Jesse. And another point in it is that he would indeed be another David. And we think about David as an extraordinary individual, characterized as a man after God's own heart. If that could be said about David, could that not be said about Jesus, the Son of God? Absolutely. Loved his father, was totally obedient to his father. Indeed, he was a man after God's own heart. Other things that you think about in terms of David was that he penned many of the Psalms that we read in the book of Psalms, and many of them prophecies about God's Son. We think about David also from the city of Bethlehem, because Bethlehem is called the city of David. And a contemporary of Isaiah, a man by the name of Micah, prophesied that would be the very place where the Son of God would be born. Micah chapter 5, verse 2. So again, this image of a shoot springing out of a dead tree stump representing the Messiah. The dynamic of that shoot, the dynamic of the Messiah, the Son of God, as we've already noted, would not be his privileged position. It would not be circumstances concerning his birth so much, but the mighty empowering of the Spirit of God is what would really set him apart. I love verse 2 because it describes what would be true of God's Son. The Spirit of the Lord will rest on him. The Spirit of wisdom and understanding. The Spirit of counsel and strength. The Spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord. Wonderful qualities. Because of the mighty Spirit of God upon that shoot, the Messiah, the Son of God, that it would manifest itself in terms of wisdom and understanding and counsel and strength, knowledge, and fear of the Lord. When I think about those qualities, I think about an ideal government leader. If I were to dream up my idea of the ideal government leader, I believe I'd want that person to have these exact qualities, wouldn't you? Wouldn't it be great to have a leader of government characterized by these things? Someone who is wise and understanding of all the circumstances, everything necessary to be a good ruler. Someone able to give wise counsel, to be able to advise the cabinet or whoever it is, to give them wise counsel. Someone that would have strength and stamina, making them fit to do the job. Someone so knowledgeable as to be able to make wise decisions as they needed to be made. And someone that would be humble and dependent upon the Lord God. Now that's my idea of a leader. Love to see government led by that kind of leader. And the good news is there will be a day when our government will be led by that very kind of leader. And boy, we can't hardly wait for that day to come, can we? So verse 2, those are the character qualifications of our Messiah for the Holy Spirit. Now verses 3 to 5 describe how those qualities are going to be used as he leads the perfect government. And so it says that he will delight in the fear of the Lord. And he will not judge by what his eyes see, nor make a decision by what his ears hear, but with righteousness he will judge the poor and decide with fairness for the afflicted of the earth. And he will strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips he will slay the wicked, and righteousness will be the belt about his loins, and faithfulness the belt about his waist. Wow. To see this man rule, what an amazing thing it will be. Delighting himself in humble obedience to his Father. He demonstrated that as he walked the earth 2,000 years ago. That will still be true of him. As an exalted head of government, he'll still be in obedience to his Father. He will delight to obey his Father. He will execute judgment according to hidden truth rather than by outward appearances. And so we get a leader who will not be swayed by the best legal argument, but rather by the matters of heart and mind. The world has never seen that kind of leader, has it? It will see it on the day when Christ rules and reigns. He will show perfect fairness to the downtrodden and the poorly represented. Now that's pretty revolutionary. Proverbs 22 verse 7 says, "The rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is a slave to the lender." Well, that may be true today, but I'm here to tell you that will not be true in Messiah's government. Finally, the poor and the downtrodden get a fair shake like they've never had at any time in human history. That's how God's Son is going to rule the earth. And one day, which is yet future, he will strike the earth. It says, with the rod of his mouth. The dynamic, the authority of his word will be the weapon that he'll use to defeat the wicked and the enemies. And with righteousness he will rule. And with faithfulness he will rule. And again, how desperately we need that kind of leadership. And so when he comes back and when he rules the world that way, there will also be an amazing scene that will unfold, because there will be peace among the natural world and harmony such as the world has not seen since the very beginning. Verses 6 to 9, a beautiful description of the age to come when Messiah rules. The wolf will dwell with the lamb, and the leopard will lie down with the young goat, and the calf and the young lion and the fatling together, and the little boy will lead them. Also the cow and the bear will graze. Their young will lie down together, and the lion will eat straw like the ox. The nursing child will play by the hole of the cobra, and the weaned child will put his hand on the viper's den. They will not hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain, for the earth will be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. What an amazing, peaceful scene. To see the animal world at peace with one another. Someone has said that in today's world, the wolf may lie down with the lamb, but the lamb won't get much sleep. I suppose that's about right, isn't it? It's not a safe thing for a wolf and a lamb to lie down together today. But there will be that day when Jesus Christ returns to rule the world, that this is how it's going to be. There'll be total peace upon earth. And the picture that we get here in these verses is that of the original perfection of the earth, back to Eden. Because if you were to look at Genesis 1, and you look at God creating all the creatures, all the animals, all the fish and so forth, they lived at peace with one another. There's not a hint that any of them were predatory back at that time. And so the picture that Isaiah prophetically paints for us here is that God's Messiah is going to take us back to Eden. And it's high time it happened, isn't it? Wouldn't it be great when the earth comes back full circle to the way that it began, a perfect garden paradise. And we as human beings will turn away from our killing and our warring ways finally, How many people have tried to broker peace throughout the ages, unsuccessfully every time? But eventually it will happen that we'll give up our desire to make war. Isaiah also made this statement in Isaiah 2, verse 4, that He, the Messiah, will judge between the nations and will render decisions for many peoples. And they will hammer their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not lift up sword against nation, and never again will they learn war. I know that's the emblem of the United Nations. They'll never get the job done. There's only one person that will ever get the job done, and it's that shoot that sprung up from the dead stump that Isaiah talks about, the Messiah. That when He comes back, He'll judge fairly, He'll deal with the problems of the nations, and as He does so, apparently we will decide that we no longer want to make war or make instruments of war, and instead we turn them into instruments of agriculture at that time. The reason why it all happens, as it says in verse 9, is that the earth will be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. Knowledge of the Lord is in pretty short supply by the peoples of the world today. But when the Son of God comes back and rules and reigns, there will be an abundance of the knowledge of the Lord, even as the waters cover the sea. What an amazing, wonderful picture that Isaiah paints for us here. So we go back to that image that we started out with in verse 1. That picture of that dead stump. And again, to think about that image that Isaiah shares, it is a picture, again, of hopelessness, representing perhaps the death of dreams and goals and ambitions and even life. That image, someone has said, is the stump of despair. And one writer says, who could imagine anything growing as they sat on the stump of utter despair? The writer says, I've sat there myself, perhaps you have too. You may be there now, at that place where hope is cut off, where loss and despair have deadened your heart. Yeah, the stump of despair. Those are some rather raw but very real words. Because that image in itself, before the more hopeful image, it is a stump of despair. And it's an image that's rather fitting in an ironic way this time of year. As you probably know, there are more suicides during the Christmas holidays than any other time of the year. This is a time of celebration for many, many people, but not everybody. There are some that are very much in despair, and so that kind of represents their situation. There was a news story that caught my attention last week, stating that loneliness is a national epidemic. What an amazing thing. The story went on to say that there is a growing consensus that loneliness, not obesity, cancer, or heart disease, is the nation's #1 health crisis. It really got my attention. Wow, loneliness? On a higher scale than all those other life-threatening diseases and illnesses? And so it really is cause to think about the condition of many people in this country and how it, of course, is magnified this time of year. So as I hear a statement like that, I think, well, technology and social media apparently have not brought us together in rather meaningful ways. Yeah, they've kind of brought us together, but apparently in superficial ways. So then if loneliness is a national epidemic, then for many people that dead stump is very, very descriptive of their lives. But that's not the image we want to linger on today, is it? Because that does not represent us as the people of God. We are the living shoot people. We are that image, not the previous image. Because we are a people who embrace, who live, who proclaim new life from death, don't we? Amen? And we say that's not just an empty philosophy. That is a reality for us, the people of God, because that is based on the truth of Christ's birth, His life, His sacrifice, and His resurrection. And so no matter how lonely Americans are, no matter how desperate the situation is with people around us, we hold out hope amidst hopelessness. And if a shoot had not sprung up from a dead stump over 2,000 years ago, we would not be talking realistically about hope today. That's the solid basis to talk about hope. Isaiah also said in chapter 53, verse 2, he said that he, referring to the Messiah, grew up before him, referring to Yahweh God, like a tender shoot and like a root out of parched ground. I never know exactly how I should pronounce, is it root or is it root? Because I came from the Midwest and I've lived away from it long enough, I'm not sure which it is, root or root. But anyway, I kind of go back to my old habit of pronouncing it when I read that word. So anyway, Isaiah prophesied that the Messiah would grow up before God like a tender shoot, like a root that comes out of parched ground. I like the way that Isaiah wrote that in the past tense. He said that he grew up past tense before God. Isaiah wrote that prophecy as though the Son of God had already been born, although Isaiah lived about 700 years before the time of Christ. Now, we get that. We understand that it's an established fact because we live in the era 2,000 years after the fulfillment of what Isaiah prophesied. We get that. We understand that. So, the symbol of a living shoot growing up from a dead stump is our powerful picture of hope. That's what we hang on to. So we never write off as dead and gone that which God infuses with life and hope. Again, that's the symbol most fitting for us and most fitting for this time of year. From the stump of despair springs up the shoot of life and possibilities. And as if you're not convinced, there's one powerful case to share with you today to remind you further. Abraham and Sarah of the Old Testament times. What a great example. And I think it's summed up so well in Hebrews 11, verses 11 and 12. By faith, even Sarah herself received ability to conceive even beyond the proper time of life, since she considered him faithful who had promised. Therefore, there was born even of one man, and him as good as dead at that, as many descendants as the stars of heaven in number, and innumerable as the sand which is by the seashore. That's powerful evidence that God brings life from death, that a shoot springs up from a dead tree stump. So we need to pause and think for a little bit this morning. What's your stump of despair? What seems hopeless? What seems even lifeless in your life? What seems beyond the realm of possibility? Remembering the birth of Christ is a powerful reminder that God brings a shoot of hope, again, up from the stump of despair. Galatians 4 and 5. But when the time was right, God sent his Son, and a woman gave birth to him, and his Son obeyed the law so that he could set free from the law so that we could become God's children. You just never know what the possibilities are that God has for us when everything seems lost and gone. Again, 700 years after Isaiah prophesied about a living shoot from a dead stump, it happened exactly as he had foretold. And because that is an established fact, you can believe something else that Isaiah prophesied, and this is one we look forward to with all of our hearts and minds and being. Isaiah 65, verses 17 and 18, when he said, "For I will create a new heaven and a new earth, and the past events will not be remembered or come to mind. Then be glad and rejoice forever in what I am creating." We love that, don't we? What Isaiah prophesied that is yet to come is based solidly upon what he prophesied that is fulfilled as we remember the birth of Christ. How we rejoice in what is yet to come. Heart.